All right. For those of you that don't know us, although it'd be weird if you didn't because you're here for some reason, I'm Travis Robbins. This is Lee. We're with NLPT and physicaltherapybuilding.com, and we are private practice owners that are helping other private practice owners try to grow their practice in whatever way makes sense for them in 2024. So, we'll talk about this, but one of the cool things that we get to look at is a lot of data because we do consulting with private practices, we do billing collection with private practices, and we see a ton of data. And we start to see metrics that are really important repeat themselves over and over again. So we want to try to share that stuff with you guys. So measuring what matters in private practice. So the whirlwind is really tough. Anybody that is sitting on this call right now is going to relate to this slide. There's so many things you have to do as a private practice owner. There's patient care, right? That's the first thing when you open your doors. That's the most important thing that you're focused on. And it's really, really important. You can't overlook that. But that's one tiny part of running the business, right? You've got marketing, human resources, billing and collections, finance, growth strategies, onboarding and training. This is what we're working a ton on now because we're growing, recruiting and hiring. Like those two things right there, that's taking up a majority of what I do on a daily basis in my practice anyway. IT and cybersecurity and a million other things that are on this list of things that you've got to kind of keep track of. So ask yourself this, what are the practices who grow 20 to 40% year over year paying attention to that you might not be? So I remember when I started this whole process, and I just had my brother-in-law. He wants to open up a restaurant. I said, man, I don't know anything about opening up a restaurant, but here's what I know. You got to find somebody that's already done what you're trying to do and just hang out with them and just try to help them out and learn what that process is. And that's what I did when I was kind of coming up before I even talked to a private practice owner, before I met Lee years and years ago. I just tried to find other private practice owners that were where I wanted to be, and I just tried to ask them questions. So I think that is a really important thing. So what are those practice owners that have multiple locations that are growing year over year? What are they looking at and what are they doing? And they have the same amount of hours in a day as you have. So I always think of this too in other industries. So I think about people that are CEOs of huge companies that have thousands of employees, have, dozens of different divisions and different sections of their companies that they're growing, and they have the same amount of time that I have, but somehow they're able to grow their businesses at a rate that is impressive when I look at the growth rate of mine. But they have the same amount of time. So what are they doing that I'm not doing? Or what are they understanding that I'm not understanding? And kind of bringing that back down to the physical therapy private practice realm, and just talking again about, in doing this over the past 6 years, there's only so many hours in the day. What metrics do you need to be managing? When you talk to other guys that are in NLPT, like Kevin and Arlen, like I think they just kind of gravitate towards statistics and numbers, and that might be you. And maybe you're tracking a bunch of different stuff in your practice right now. For me, I get into numbers and it gets a little bit overwhelming for me. I'm definitely better at it now than I used to be from hanging out with these guys. But it's still, to me, isn't there like a handful of these things that I can really look at and manage? And those are the most important things. And if I just focus on those, the other stuff becomes either not as important or completely unnecessary. So that's what I want to try to do for you guys, is to try to simplify this. And so today's goal is to get owners to stop majoring in minor things. I've heard this recently somewhere, I can't remember, but it really kind of made sense to me. You ever like at your desk, Marianne, and you're working on your practice and you spent like an hour doing something that if you had never even looked at it, everything would have been fine. And you're like, wow, maybe I shouldn't have spent all that time and effort on this one thing. Where should I be focusing my effort where I have the biggest impact so that I'm not, working 60 hours a week, that I can actually kind of hang out with my family and friends and do the things that you kind of opened up your practice to do, right? To have this idea of more money and more free time. If you want to be able to try to do those things, you've got to simplify stuff. And it starts by pulling the levers that have the biggest impact in your practice. So here's the first metric, revenue per visit. So this should not be a surprise if you guys have listened to me for any amount of time, only because I've just seen the impact of this. So the coaching students that I have improved their revenue per visit, and that has allowed them to get some breathing room, right? So a lot of practice owners that I work with are kind of treading water. And it's like, man, I'm just trying to make payroll. And I'm just trying to make sure there's enough money in the bank account to make payroll the next time that comes up. And guess what? When you make more money per visit and there's more money available, it's kind of like oxygen to a business. So the definition of revenue per visit is the average revenue from your closed claims for both insurance and over-the-counter collections. So it's what you're getting from insurance companies, and it's your cash payments or credit card payments or checks that you're getting as over-the-counter payments. That's the whole process of that. It's not revenue divided by visits over time. This is how I used to do it, right? But as everybody on this call probably knows, is if I treat a patient today, I'm not going to get paid for that today. I might get the patient payment of it, but I'm not going to get the full payment of that. So we have to look at closed claims and really pull out the data. So keys to success are, first off, just get a starting point. So you've got to go through, either your billing company should have this information, your EMR might have it. It could be a combination of a couple of them, but for sure, if you're outsourcing billing, or if you have a billing team in-house, you should be able to go to them and say, hey, we need to find out what our revenue per visit is. And I remember the first time going through this in a very longhand version of this, we would look at our EOBs, things that we would get back from the insurance company, and we would take all those numbers and we would assign them to visits, and then we would average that number. That's how you have to do it. If there's not an easy way to do it in your EMR, or your billing company can't supply that for you, but you got to find out what that number is. So how much can poor performance be costing you? Our hidden millions number, which if you guys have heard me talk about this before, you just take the number of visits. So your average number of visits, let's just take it per week. So if it was 200 visits a week and you added $10 to that, that's the minimum. And the companies that we work with is increasing their revenue per visit by $10 per visit. That's an extra $2,000 a week. And that might not seem like a lot, but for a practice that is doing 200 visits a week, $2,000 a week, it's extra $100,000 that you have at the end of the year. If your practice is bigger, that number obviously gets bigger. But that $10 is typically the minimum. When we start looking at this, and I'll tell you a quick story. Chuck was working with one of our clients today, and this is a guy that has increased his revenue per visit by $45 a visit since we started working with him. Now, that's not typical, right? So I'm not going to, you guys aren't going to get off this webinar and increase your revenue per visit by $45 per visit, probably, but there's some room for improvement there. In the training that we did today, that had to do with code selection and a little bit more fine tuning once you understand units per visit and how that relates to revenue per visit, he's probably going to add an extra $10 a visit to his revenue per visit, just in like some of the training that we're doing. So that stuff is important. And I think that prior practice owners kind of shy away from that. I don't know about you, Lee, but in the practices that I've worked with, it's not something they've like looked at immediately. I don't know why, but and I certainly didn't do it when I began, but man, there's a ton of power in doing that because it can have a huge impact in your practice. So next actions in terms of, okay, I'm maybe I've looked at revenue per visit, maybe I haven't before. The next thing you got to do is you got to find that number, and then you got to find your highest and lowest in your organization in terms of providers. That will just give you a ton of insight into what's going on and your clinicians' understanding of what they're coding and what they're selecting for codes, because you're going to see a huge difference in that. I've never done that initially with the practice and seen less than like a $15 or $20 difference between the top provider and the bottom provider. So that means that when a visit comes into your practice, if it's seen by somebody that is the top coder, they're going to get an extra $20 every time that patient comes in and sees that clinician as compared to your lowest. Or the other way to look at it is every time that someone comes in and sees your lowest coding provider, that's $20 you lost. And that will be powerful in terms of your interest in looking into this number. Understanding when insurance companies, yeah, go ahead.
Travis, real quick. So what's the variance should be? What do you say at your clinic?
I'd be very surprised if you guys have not looked at this, that you'd see less than a $20 difference for people that are not observing this. For us, we look for $4 either way. So yeah, we don't want to see a difference, like the highest and lowest. Now there are some reasons sometimes that insurance providers, like your payer mix, can throw that off. Sometimes, depending on how your scheduling goes, if you're seeing a higher Medicare population, for us, Medicare is one of our best payers in Pennsylvania. But if it's not scheduled properly, meaning if there's a lot of overlap and we end up group coding a lot of that, like if our clinics get busier, our higher Medicare clinics get busier, we're going to see a slight decrease in reimbursement, only like a couple bucks, because we're going to end up group coding a lot of that. And then we have to kind of spread that out. But what we should see, I think is what you saw, Lee. I'm okay with like $2 to $4 difference between highest and lowest. What you're going to find,
you're going to compare like PT to PT and then PTA to PTA, right?
Exactly. Because of course you guys know, like, especially if you have a high Medicare population, our PTAs are going to get reimbursed lower. A lot of people have moved away from PTAs. it's still, when you look at the equation, like the cost per delivery is going to be lower with a PTA. So it still makes sense for us to use PTAs. And I think for most people, when they really look at it, it's still going to make sense for us to use PTAs. But yeah, you're going to have to compare PTs altogether versus PTAs altogether because you're going to get a rate cut. That's a good point. All right. Length of stay. Definition, average number of visits per closed plan of care. So again, this is also not visits divided by initial evaluations over time, because your number is going to get skewed there. If you say, hey, I just want to look at it, what it was for the month. So if you have a lot of initial evaluations that month, more than typical, then your length of stay is going to go down drastically. You have to go by kind of closed plans of care. So how we do it is we start at the beginning of the year, and at the beginning of the year, our numbers are going to be skewed a little bit because we don't have a lot of data from the beginning of the year. But if we discharge somebody on the second day of the year and they came 22 times, then that length of stay for that plan of care is 22. So we have to average that out. This is, when we first started looking at this, one of the big things that Arlen realized was we had very similar like sizes of practices in terms of like location and volume, but he saw a lot more initial evaluations than me. And when we looked at it, it was like, is Travis's revenue higher than Arlen's? It's because when he's seeing less initial evaluations, it's because our length of stay was different. And length of stay wasn't that different. A lot of people will say, oh, his length of stay was twice what Arlen's was. There's only 2 visits different. And that made an enormous difference in the value of the plan of care and also total revenue over time. So keys to success with this, again, same thing. You've got to find out what this number is. If you're not tracking this number, then you've got to start tracking it. And in the beginning, it might be a little bit arduous, but you've got to go through and just just take your last 100 initial evaluations that have come in, or last couple
That's what
hundred. The bigger
Chuck
that number
does.
is, what's that?
That's what Chuck does.
Yeah.
He
Yeah,
says
exactly.
ongoing.
Yeah.
So what Chuck does, it's money.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
track the
So,
last 100 ongoing. So
yeah. So we look at, unless it's the beginning of the year, we look at the last 13 weeks. And so we'll take every week that goes by, another chunk of 13 weeks goes through. So ours really consistently is between 16 and 17. We started doing some more Medicare maintenance last year. As we got into that, it went up a little bit, but not a ton to make like a huge difference. But we're between 16 and 17. We want to see that number kind of stay there. That's the number for my practice. That might not be the number for your practice for some odd reason. I have a very like I don't know, typical outpatient physical therapy practice. We see a lot of patients that are middle-aged. We're at about 27% Medicare. That's probably a little bit lower than some practices. I know Lee is a little bit higher in terms of Medicare population. Our Medicare population has a longer length of stay. But right around that number is what we look at. For whatever reason, when we start to look at practices, and when you first look at it, I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to be somewhere around 9. I don't know why, but when practices that we work with start looking at it, that's what the length of stay is. And we're like, well, why is your length of stay 9 and mine is 17? What clinicians will say, let's say we're in your practice, and I know this doesn't happen in your practice, but you've got all your clinicians sitting there, and you've got, one clinician is at 18s, one is at 17, one is at 16, and one is at 9. What is the clinician that's at 9 typically gonna say when you say, hey, how come your length of stay is 9?
they're going to say, I must be a better PT. My people are
Exactly.
getting better
They're
quicker.
getting better. Here's what's never happening in that situation. At least if you can show it to me, I would love to see it, because I've done this with hundreds of clinicians, and I've never seen where successful graduation is higher in that population. So I'm okay with a length of stay of 9 as long as that successful graduation is above 80%. Here's the problem: I've never seen it. Most good outcomes with physical therapy is associated with a longer length of stay. That doesn't mean we're trying to squeeze as much visits out of people as possible. That always blows my mind when we get, reports back from our insurance providers. Some of them will say, hey, your length of stay is higher than everybody else. And I'll say, well, what are the clinical outcomes that are happening everywhere else? What's usually happening is you're having a lot of drop-offs in the people that have like a 9 length of stay. Because guess what's going to destroy your length of stay? When like 20 or 30% of the patients that come in have like a 1, 2, or 3 on length of stay. When you're averaging that number in to what your normal length of stay should be, 17, 18, 19, 20, and your successful graduations go back into the numbers, and the people that have successful outcomes, they're going to have way higher than your average length of stay for your practice. So we could do a whole webinar on that. But poor performance is what it's costing you. It's, again, typically like 2 visits per plan of care. So take your revenue per visit, let's say it's $100, and then take your initial evaluations that you plan on seeing for the year. Let's say, I mean, if that was 1,000, right? So that would be an extra $200,000. So that's just a two on a length of stay. And again, it's not trying to beg people to come in for more physical therapy. Guys, like in my area, huge deductibles, $40 copays. Like I can't beg people to come in and pay $40 for something they don't need. That doesn't happen. But making sure that you cut off on your dropouts is what you really need to do. Lee, you raised your hand. Do you want to say something? Oh, you're muted, bud.
Sorry, I've been like clearing my throat, so I don't want to
Oh.
like. Yeah, I'll lower my hand. But Wade had a question. What do you consider a successful discharge? Sorry.
First off, Wade, that's a swear word, and you're not allowed to swear on my webinars. Discharge is not something that we're allowed to say, and I'm going to get to that in one of my metrics. So don't worry. Hold on, Wade, and we're going to
Actually,
get.
he didn't say that. He said,
Okay.
"What do you consider a successful plan of care?" That was my bad.
Okay. Successful plan of care. We don't discharge patients, right? It's because discharge, I don't know. Like I always say, did you ever get discharged from your dentist? Like, no. Like, you need to go back for continued plans of care. So, like for me, like we never discharge patients. They graduate, so they graduate with their shoulder degree. But if they hurt their back, they've got to come back and get their spine degree. That's another thing that we'll talk about. But we're going to talk about that eventually. Great question. Next actions in terms of this is just getting your clinicians behind case management. So you've got to get them invested in successful graduation. I'm telling you right now, when your successful graduation goes up, your length of stay is going to go up, your plan of care value is going to go up, and your clinical outcomes are going to go up. Eliminating dropouts, we talked about that. You've got to make sure if you've got patients that are coming, like a dropout for us is 5 times or less, and they don't have a successful graduation. If they come 5 times or less and they're a vestibular patient and we cleaned them up in like 3 or 4 visits, that's one thing. But if they're coming 5 times or less and they disappear, they are vanished off the schedule, that is a dropout, and that is a big issue in our practice. So, graduation rate. Okay, definition is the percentage of initial evaluations you get to a successful outcome as defined in your practice. There are various definitions of this, but for the most part, what should happen is at initial evaluation, you set some major goals for the patient. They get through a plan of care. They've achieved those goals to their satisfaction. Maybe they haven't got 100% of that, but there's agreement on both sides of the table. The clinician feels like I'm good with you going home and continuing with home exercise program or probably over the next couple weeks to a month. Any kind of issues are going to go away. You're going to achieve these, and if we're good with that, then that's fine. They filled out an NPS, so they have to fill out a a form that gives us a grade on how we did on a lot of different things, and that becomes a successful graduation. So I think that's kind of the question that Wade was asking: a successful plan of care completion or successful graduation. That's what that is. So Wade, when we were talking about someone, if you have a practice with different clinicians that had length of stays of 14, 15, 17. You got one at 9, and the one at 9 says, hey, man, I'm just a better PT than everybody else. I'm going to tell you that's usually not the case. I have not seen it yet. So that person is probably going to have a lower successful graduation rate because they're going to have dropouts that disappear and they don't successfully graduate. All right, so keys to success here. Again, you've got to start off with the starting point. This is probably one of the tougher numbers. If you don't track this in your practice, it's going to be a little bit of work to try to find out what this is. If you don't have a plan of care completion process, like someone goes through and on their last day gets, there's a process we call graduation in our practice. They fill out some forms, they take their picture, we put them up on the wall, we put them on social media if that's okay with them, and we really celebrate the fact that we help this patient achieve the goals that they set out at their initial evaluation. So you got to find out what that number is. If you don't have this data going back forward, just start today. It's like, okay, every initial evaluation that comes in, we're going to track this. And I remember the first time that I started tracking this, it was a whiteboard, and we just put it up in the back room of one of our offices, and we just every time initial evaluation came in, we wrote it down. And then after that, it was at some point they were either graduated successfully, so they did the whole process and took their picture, or they disappeared and fell off the map and they were unsuccessfully graduated. The number that we look for is 80%. Our highest clinic last year, which is the first time that our Upper Macungie clinic didn't get it last year, they missed it by a half a percentage point. Our Allentown clinic got it by 84%. So they were 84%, and our Macungie clinic was 83.5. Everybody was above 80%, which is what we shoot for. If you're not getting above 80%, don't get discouraged, but inspect it. You got to try to find out why that's happening. I think that's a universal number that everybody should be able to hit if they're focusing on case management in their practice. So what is poor performance costing you? We run the numbers on this because we have a ton of data. when you first look at this, I know again something else that we will tell private practice owners, like, hey, you got to look at your graduation rate. Oh, I don't need to worry about that. Like, well, what do you think yours is? 90% at least. And when if they actually look at it, usually what they start at is 30 or 40%, and they're devastated. I've started off with that. When I first started looking at it, I was like, yeah, we must be at least like 75, 80% of these are successful. And it was like 30 or 40%. We're like, holy crap, like we're only getting 30 to 40% of these patients successful outcomes. That's not acceptable. And we need to work on that. So for every improvement that you make, so let's say you started at 40%, if you can get that to 50% by the end of the year, you're going to add an extra one visit to your successful graduation, to your plans of care. So if you're averaging 9 right now and you improve your successful graduation by 10%, that will go to 10. If you can improve by 20%, that will go to 11. So those are general numbers, but what we see is focusing in on that number will improve your length of stay, which will improve your plan of care value, which the whole goal of this is just to improve the results that you're getting in your clinic. So it should be pretty easy to get your clinicians behind this. So the next actions are just active patient tracking. So Chuck does this a ton. He's the main guy that taught this to me. And if you're not doing active patient tracking, you're not going to get graduation rate. Because if you don't know where every single plan of care is in your practice, then you don't know their status. And you're trying to get, again, 80% plus of them to a successful resolution. And you're trying as hard as you can to do that. So each office needs to know this number. So if I go to my clinical directors, and I woke them up in the middle of the night on Sunday. I said, how many active plans of care do you have in your practice? They better be able to tell me pretty close to what that is. If you're not focusing on that number, then your clinicians are not going to focus on it. So you have to do that. Lee.
Let's ask our attendees how many are tracking their active patients.
All
Just
right.
drop in the
So
chat.
yeah,
I
put in
can't
the
do a
chat.
poll, but
Yeah. And let's be honest. If
just
everybody
just a Y
knows,
or a N.
yeah, yes or no in there. If you're tracking your active patients, some of you guys are past clients of ours, so you better be tracking your past patient, your plans of care. But if you're not tracking that, then let us know. If you are, put a yes in there.
The
All
OG
right.
says yepper.
There we go. He better be. Or better be at least be lying to me. All right. Schedule efficiency. This is kind of a newer stat that we've looked at really over the past couple years. And what we're trying to do is get the definition of this is actual productivity divided by expected productivity. So when we talk about clinician productivity, that's different all across the United States. Some clinicians and practices do it by visits per hour. Lee, do you do it by visits per hour or no?
Sorry, I was like going through the chat. I wasn't paying
Yeah,
attention to
sorry,
what you
man. All
asked me.
right, so
My bad.
I'll explain how I do schedule efficiency. I used to do 1.5 patients per hour. That's what I wanted. So if it was a 40-hour week, I would expect a clinician to see 60 visits in that week. I felt like that was reasonable. Talk to my clinicians, they say, yeah, that's a reasonable number. For some people listening to this, that might not be a reasonable number. When we get to the Pacific Northwest, like anything
We're
over
50.
40, it seems to be high.
Yeah, our
Um,
number's 50. I don't know if it's per hour. I guess
okay,
I can divide that by,
right.
40, whatever. Yeah.
So that's what I do it as a number per week that I think a clinician should see, and it depends on what kind of clinician you are. So for us, our staff PTs, we expect them to see 60, right? So they've got initial evaluations in their schedule. I mean, technically in their schedule, there's somewhere around 80 slots that you can put a patient. You're going to get jammed up by initial evaluations for full hours. Okay? And you're not going to get 100% arrival rate. At least it doesn't happen very often. It does happen sometimes, but that would everything would have to be full to do this. So we plan for some cancellations. We plan for initial evaluations. We feel like 60 is a reasonable number for them to be able to see. We expect our physical therapy assistants to see 67 because they don't have their schedule jammed up by initial evaluations. They have truly somewhere around 40 or I'm sorry, 80 slots in their schedule in a 40-hour week, although none of our clinicians are treating for 40 hours a week. They're taken out for their weekly meeting, one-on-ones, that kind of stuff. But somewhere around 80 slots in the week, they're going to have some cancellations. We feel like they should see 67. Our clinical directors see the fewest because they have the most administrative tasks. They're involved in marketing. They're doing one-on-ones with all of their direct reports. So we expect them to see 50. If a staff PT sees 60 in a week, they've hit 100% clinical efficiency. I mean, we're busy right now, but usually we shoot for like 85% and above. That's what we want them to be. So it ends up being somewhere around what Lee is saying, which is like around 50 is the number that we would expect them to see. But what we see with a lot of practices, one, they don't have expectations for that. And you guys, if you're not hearing it now on interviews, you're going to start hearing it more. I mean, I'm hearing it more in interviews where one of the questions when we hand it over to them, like, hey, what questions do you have about the position? It's like, how many visits am I expected to see per week? Because that can give you an idea of expected volume that they want to see. A lot of them will do it per day. I hear a lot of clinicians talk about that, like 8 or 10 per day. But we do it by the week because the schedules are, typically a couple longer days, a couple shorter days. Everybody's off at 1 on Friday because I can't get people to work past 1 on Friday. But that's kind of the idea of schedule efficiency. And you got to know what that number is because that number is, I mean, above break even, that's where your profit margin is. So if your schedule efficiency is low, meaning your clinicians are not as busy as they should be, then every visit that comes above break even is essentially 100% profit because you've paid your bills, right? So the biggest problems I see is clinics don't have a number for this. Like they don't know what that number is, and they're certainly not tracking it. So the other thing that becomes important here is when you get a little bit busier, what happens to these other numbers? Usually, when we work with clinics and their schedule efficiency goes up, they have to keep an eye on other things. What's going on with your arrival rate? Are patients kind of canceling and we're not rescheduling them because the clinicians are so busy or relatively busy compared to what they're used to that they're not super motivated to get people back? And what happens to the successful graduation rate? Typically, if our visit frequency, the number of time patients comes in, goes down, then our successful graduation is going to take a hit because guess what? The more frequently you come in for PT, the better the results are on the floor. So the next actions are if you're getting your team to want to have full schedules, that becomes a little bit difficult depending on what your bonus structure that you have set up. If people are incentivized, if the clinic does better, then the clinicians do better. If that's not in place, sometimes that can be a little bit tricky. But you have to want clinicians that want to have full schedules. If you don't have that, then you're going to struggle. And then weekly, quarterly, and annual productivity bonuses. Again, that's a whole nother webinar that we do. That can become important. A lot of teams are not motivated by money. Sometimes they're motivated by other things like paid time off. But you've got to have a team that wants to be fully scheduled out. All right, Lee, what's up?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, what does this number look like? I mean, we're saying schedule efficiency. Give me an example of what the number is.
Yeah, so it's
'Cause
percentage. We
I
do
think
it.
because I think what you're saying is that I track it a little bit different than what you're, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah.
Give me
So
the number.
ours is a percentage. So if we have a PT, let's say we had a clinical director is supposed to see 50, and we have a staff PT that's supposed to see 60 in a week. We just have those two clinicians in that office. If they saw 110 visits that week, they'd be 100% schedule efficiency.
Got it.
Underneath that is not going to be 100. That's how we measure. We measure individually by clinician. We measure it by individual location. So each location has one. And then, of course, we measure it by the entire company. How do you guys measure it?
We generally do it by slots. So we may have like for each clinician, they may have like 14 slots for the day,
Mhm.
and they may only see 11 that on any given day. So
Yep.
that's how
So
we
take
do it.
11
So,
divided by 14. That's somewhere around 80% or 76% or something
but
like that.
but the expectation is for them to see 50. So I probably should make that number 10 per day if I'm really, because 14 is what, 70 visits a day or 70 slots a week, sorry.
Yeah.
But I'm expecting them to do, so I need to kind of rework how I'm doing that. So
Mhm.
anyway,
Yeah.
good insight.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't care how you do it as long as you're doing it and you
Yeah.
have agreement from your team. Like, is this reasonable? So when we set out our annual numbers for the year and we're like, hey, we're looking to really increase the number. We're opening up at least one clinic. We're opening up a clinic on Monday. So there's expectation that our numbers are going to go up. And as a result of those numbers, here's the bonus numbers that they're going to hit. And we say, are you guys okay with these numbers? And they have to get agreement on that. So you have to get agreement from your team, like in an individual clinic. So if you're talking, Lee, if you got, so many clinicians there, you're like, is it reasonable for you to see 50 in a week? And they say, yeah, that's completely reasonable. Because once it gets up to like your 50 a week, if that's 100% for you, and you guys are 100% for a while, you want to make sure that all those numbers are headed in the right direction too. You can't see a drop off in all the other numbers that make your clinic go, like arrival rate and successful graduation. And you get them, hey, I thought you said it was cool to see 50 in a week. It's like, well, you know what? 50 was just like too much. Like we can't manage all these plans of care. And then that becomes other issues because go and talk to people that have clinics in New York State and try to run a clinic on 50 visits a week. It's not going to work. So, yeah, I don't care how you do it, how you measure it, but you need to measure it. Everybody needs to know what that number is, and everybody has to have an agreement that that number is okay. With my clinicians, with my PTAs, they see 67, they're okay with that. Guess what? As soon as they go over that, they get an immediate bonus. So, I was in one of my clinics this week, and the professional highlight that they put in their meeting rhythm was that they hit their bonus for the last 2 weeks. I couldn't be more excited about seeing that in there. They got extra money in their paycheck. They said, yeah, I went and did this on the weekend because the extra money I got in my paycheck. That's like the full process of this. It can't be that they just, work their tails off and get no reward for that. There has to be short and long-term rewards for that. And that's what I talk about down here, getting your team to want full schedules. You've got to find people that, yeah, if they see 67, 68, 69, 70, that they're going to get an extra bump in their paycheck, and that kind of helps them out. Initial evaluation bucketing. All right, so Lee is going to talk about this, but the definition here, and again, it's another thing that I used to do a terrible job of, and now that I'm tracking it more, I really see the importance of it. It's really holding your marketing accountable. So if you're a growing practice, we talked about, hey, if you're on here, your practice is you're trying to grow that from 20 to 40% a year. If you're a growing practice, you've got to invest money in marketing. I'll tell you what, last year I did a mastermind with the guys. I had like a small one at our Seattle live event, and Arlen looked at all my numbers and he said, I figured out your problem. So we were kind of stagnant, we weren't really growing, and it's because we weren't spending any money on marketing. And I said, yeah, I've been kind of getting away with not spending money in marketing. He says, yeah, but you're not growing. I said, yeah, that's pretty accurate. And he goes, I usually start spending $9,000 a month on marketing. And I said, well, what am I supposed to spend it on? He goes, I don't care. And so what happened is we started doing that, and then we saw a huge jump in our initial evaluations. Just because you spend money on marketing doesn't mean it's going to work. I'm not saying that. We evaluated it and we looked at a ton of things, but we're holding that $9,000 accountable. How do we do that? Every single patient that comes into our practice, we've got to know how they found out about our practice. And I think a lot of practices will shy away from this. They feel like, don't open with it. It's not the first when someone calls your office and says, my shoulder's killing me. Can you guys help me out? You're not saying, how'd you find out about us? You've got to put it in the right place, but it's important information, and you've got to find out what that is. Because if you don't bucket your initial evaluations, then you're going to run into trouble. So I'm going to show you guys a super basic way that I do it. I have 6 buckets in my practice. And Lee, how many buckets do you have in your practice?
I don't know. Let me look.
So Lee, I did this on purpose because Lee has a ton, and he does a better job of holding his marketing accountable. I'll say you can pick whichever one you want. Mine is super simple. So here every week, I know where every single initial evaluation that comes in comes from. So I've got these buckets here. Friends and family. This is someone that come in and said, hey, my aunt came here and told me this place is awesome. Great. We're going to put you in that bucket. General public. So this is our Facebook ads, Google AdWords, not even website, because website comes down to SEO, which I'll talk about in a second. But any kind of paid advertising that we do, newspaper ads. I haven't done one of those in a while, but if we did newspaper ads, that's what we do. Past patient. Pretty straightforward. If you've been here before and you come back, you're a past patient. That's our biggest bucket. And healthy practices that have been around for a long time, we want to see this number big. If I go into a practice and I see this number is really low, I start to get concerned about what's happening on the floor. Physician, this is one of our lower buckets, and it has shrunk as physicians have gotten purchased. It's by hospitals. It's not something we focus nothing on. But it is getting tougher and tougher in our area. This is a lower bucket, but actually in the beginning of the year, we're doing a lot better in this bucket than we have been in a while. SEO, so this is search engine optimization. So if they found us somehow, they Googled physical therapy in my area, or they somehow found one of our blog posts because they Googled something, this is where they would go. We've done a better job of website conversion with a new company that we've partnered with, to where there's like a chat box, and we're monitoring that a little bit better. We're answering questions. So this number has actually gotten a lot better in the beginning of the year as compared to last year. And then work comp. Some of you guys may not do work with work comp companies. We do. It's one of our smaller buckets. We don't see a ton from there, but we do generate some referrals from work comp. So if a new patient comes in, they've got to fall into one of these buckets. All right, Lee, you want to share yours?
Sure. I counted 19, but I feel like the key here is really with your front your front desk.
Yeah. So as you're
Because
pulling
a
that
lot of
up,
our
I
team,
want you guys, yeah, think about that. Who does this in your practice? We've tried a bunch of different ways and had moderate success until we change it to the way that we're doing it right now. Some practices will say, hey, the person that answers the phone is going to get that information. Sometimes, patients that come in and are doing an intake, they don't want to be on the phone for a half hour. So we found that we wouldn't get super great information because the person that was answering the phone felt uncomfortable about asking for it. And they just want to get the patient in for initial evaluation. So we kind of scrapped that. We used to ask for it at the front desk. We had like a little line on their intake form. How'd you first find out about us? And we got terribly unreliable information from that. So what we did is we made the clinician responsible for that. And it did two things really well. One, it became an easier process. Like as you're spending an hour with a patient, initial evaluation, you're getting to know them. At some point, you can kind of sneak in. We usually do it towards the end. Hey, how'd you find out about this? Like if they're a past patient, we know, we kind of mark them down. So we have one sheet on intake that the therapist has to fill out, and they have to designate where that patient goes to. And two, it made our clinicians focus on marketing a little bit more. So it let them see that it's kind of important where we get new patients in. If you guys want to hit your weekly, quarterly, annual bonuses based on the profitability of our practice, then you want to have some involvement in the marketing. So for us, we ask our treating clinicians that do the initial evaluation to get that information. That might not be the way it is in your practice. Doesn't mean that the way I do is the only way to do it. It's been the most effective way that we've gotten really good information on this. All right, Lee, keep going.
can you see the
Yep, yep,
tracker? Okay,
yep.
cool. Yep. So basically, how our team does it, you can see the information there. I try to black out any. So these are the buckets that we have. Uh, there's a ton, like I said, 19, and we actually have one of those 19 is other. So if we don't have a bucket, and they're actually people, I have staff that bucket it as other. But like you were saying, I feel like our team really, it's more the receptionist or front desk that's bucketing them and not the clinician.
Mhm.
Because obviously the clinician can do the deep dive. We know if it's a past patient, but like those ones that are friends and family that are coming back, those are the ones that are a little bit more difficult to capture, and they kind of get bucketed in the physician. So our tracker just feeds into this graph here, and as you can see, I can just select the period. So this is just for this year. You can see our physician bucket is quite a bit
Oof, tie.
more
Wish mine
than
was that big.
yeah. But like I said, I feel like it's probably not. We just kind of get lazy and just say, "Oh, it's a physician. They didn't ask the question," or something like that.
Hmm.
And then you can see the other. We actually have 9 bucketed in the other category that they couldn't find out of the other 18 categories. Um, and we had walk in, and I said, "You cannot put walk in as a." They found us somehow. It wasn't even if it was our big ass sign. So but anyway, yeah, so that's kind of what our system looks like. So very helpful. One cool thing that I like about ours too, we have a system where if it's a first time referral, they'll drop here. So we're able to send that physician, a thank you note or something like that. Or our marketing director will make an intentional stop by their location, thanking them for the referral. So if you're
Yeah.
looking for your marketer something to, you know, take to the doctor, that this is a good way to do that. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. So there's lots of different ways that you can kind of spin off of this. But if you're a practice right now that's not tracking that at all, you've got to start tracking that in some way.
yeah,
Um,
even if you're just doing the basic like physician, returning patient, or website, and what do you think? Like friends and family, probably be your basic 4.
Yeah, start with 4. Start somewhere. You got to start tracking that information. Because if you're gonna, I always talk to physicians about marketing. It blows my mind. I had a physician once I was in his office, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing for marketing?" Just because I don't always like to talk about just strict clinical stuff. And I used to see this guy in the newspaper all the time, and I'd say, "You spent a lot of money on newspaper." And guess what the newspaper ad was? The ad was, "Hey, here's my phone number, come in and see me." And sometimes for physicians that works. No direct response, no idea. There's no way he can track this because he's not tracking it up front. I said, "How much do you spend a month on newspaper?" He goes, $10,000. And I was like, I didn't spend at that time $10,000 on marketing in like a quarter. And so I was like, wow, is that really working? And he goes, you know what? I'm not sure. And I said, well, how do you know if it's working? Or like, why don't you just turn it off? He goes, oh, I'm too afraid to turn it off. So he just handed over $10,000 every month to the newspaper because he was just too afraid to turn it off because he wasn't holding it accountable. So you've got to make sure that you're holding that accountable. And this is what we talked about. Yeah, wasted marketing dollars. I mean, for us, it's like 10% of revenue. That's a large amount of money at the end of the year because Arlen made me spend that. And I want to make sure that I'm spending in the right place. And as it turns out, the money that we're spending is starting to give a really good return on that. So we're happy about that. And then building a system for capture. So we talked about that. All right, Lee, go ahead. Oh, Lee, you're muted, bud. Sorry.
Caleb's asking, are we covering physician marketing in Nashville?
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
Well, Caleb, go ahead.
100% we are. And we just got a sneak peek at what Kevin Koska's delivering, and it's amazing. I'm sending my marketer to this thing just to capture what Kevin's going to be talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it's amazing stuff. So
yep.
super
Um,
excited about it.
yeah, one of my team is going to come too. As soon as I saw that, I was like, oh boy, I gotta start. That's going to be awesome. So we're going to talk about that, Caleb, in a minute here. Last one we're going to do is initial valuation arrival rate. This one is the one I talked about in the video and in promoting this. It's something that we looked at our offsite. And it's, again, with like so many things to look at, we look at a ton of metrics, not as much as Lee and Arlen and Chuck and those guys. We look at a ton of metrics as compared to other practices. And what we would always come to at our weekly meeting with all our clinical directors, we would look at our initial valuation arrival rate. And it was 90%. It was pretty consistently. Some were higher, some were lower, but across the board, as we kind of tabulate that for the year, it was about 90%. And what would happen is if it was low, I would say to clinical director, hey, like what's going on? Your initial valuation arrival rate was 60% this week. Did you recapture those? And like, oh, let me look for a second. They would go through and say, oh yeah, one of those, yeah, definitely reschedule the next week. The other one was sick. We'll call them back. And the other one, oh, they had to go away for something for 2 weeks and they're definitely going to call back. And I was like, are they definitely going to call back? And they're like, I hope so. So we didn't have anybody that was in charge of looking at that. So here's what we looked at 90% across the course of last year. We said, well, we're not going to get 100%. Some people, they end up, they schedule initial evaluation for the following week. I feel amazing. I took my medication from my doctor. I don't need pain anymore. So I'm not going to come in. I'll call you back if I need you. And we tried to say, hey, that might not be the best strategy, but okay, fine. Like you're never going to get to 100%. But we looked at what if we went from 90 to 95%? How much revenue would that have meant for us last year? It's anybody, you can put it in the chat. So, you guys don't exactly know the size practice I have. We averaged like 450 visits a week last year. So we had like what, 12, what does that mean? 1,300 initial evaluations. If I could have gone from 90% arrival rate for my initial evaluations to 95%, which we feel like is reasonable, how much extra revenue would I have in my bank account right now? So you guys can throw that in the chat and I'll wait just a second. As we're kind of putting that together, then let me go back up here and I'll talk about clean data. One, you've got to know what that number is. So a lot of people don't record that, right? So if an initial evaluation cancels, they'll do like a total arrival rate for like every visit in the week. But a lot of patients will not look at that. So the first thing you got to do is you've got to know what that number is. So if you're not tracking it right now, it would probably be difficult to retroactively do it, but like starting on Monday or whenever you guys want to start this, start looking at your initial evaluation arrival rate. Go ahead, Lee.
I got a question on this.
Yeah.
And we have a way to capture this. So say you have somebody cancel. They don't come in, but you get them rescheduled. Say you had like 10 referrals that week, one of them canceled, but then you got them rescheduled. How do you do that? Is that 10 out of 11 scheduled, or is it 10 out of 10?
Yeah, so if they reschedule, then you have to which is what we weren't doing, retroactively go back and fix that number. But it's funny that Lee is saying, hey, this is how we do it now. We're doing it the way that Lee is doing it because we have the same spreadsheet guy and like, hey, here's what Lee does. I'm like, holy crap, that is smart. Like we were not doing this. So I'll tell you
you
the
want
number.
me to show you my sheet?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Do you have it up?
Seriously, I have it. Yeah, man.
All right. So as Lee brings that up,
let me.
there's
You gotta stop sharing.
yeah, it would have been an extra $250,000 for our practice if I'd have just had 95% arrival rate. I don't have the biggest practice in the world, guys. So just going from 90 to 95, if we focus in on that, it was an extra $250,000 that I would have had just by tracking down plans of care. So just making sure, like if they don't come in, following up and just making sure we're doing a better job of indoctrination and saying, okay, you're sick now, or you went away now. We've got to have a process in place and put someone in charge of making sure that they own that metric, that they are recapturing those, what we call now in our practice this year, lost plans of care, different than dropouts, right? So these are lost plans of care. A lost plan of care for us is $1,700. So it's worth tracking that down. All right. So yeah, Lee, this is exactly
Yeah.
what our spreadsheet guy showed me. Is like, hey, here's how Lee does it. So show us how you do it.
Okay, so this is our, let me make sure I'm not in my actual tracker. So once they're scheduled, um, where is it? Yeah, right here. So once they get scheduled here on this sheet, they go from unscheduled to whatever, if it's this week that they're coming in or next week.
Mhm.
But if they cancel, like, so right here, this patient, let me just highlight the row. They canceled, so they would automatically go back into the unscheduled referral bucket to be scheduled. So you never lose track of those
Right.
evals. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that was the key. So
So this year you've got what, 11 minutes? So you've got six there that are unscheduled that you've got to try follow up on.
yeah, there's a little more
Maybe
than
seven.
six. And we
Yeah.
kind of keep it clean. So if we know maybe we've called them 3 or 4 times. These are actual referrals, so they may not have been scheduled, but um, for what various reasons they may not come in. But
Yeah.
right here on the middle column where it says evals this week, if they canceled, they get put back into this column for us to make sure we're getting or capturing them or getting them back on the schedule. So
Yeah. So every line there is like $1,800 to Lee.
yeah,
So we've got to make sure that we're putting a little bit more effort into tracking those down. And so for
yeah.
this year, that's one of the things that we're really focusing on is looking at your initial evaluation arrival rate and making sure that's where it is supposed to be. All right. So we are almost done, guys. So from here, we went to IE bucketing, arrival rate. Okay, once you have this stuff nailed down, again, those are the biggest levers that you can pull in your practice. Other things you might want to look at are visit frequency. We've talked a ton about that. Space utilization percentage. So we feel like you should see 100 visits for every 1,000 square feet of space that you have. So if you have a 2,000 square foot facility, you should be able to see 200 visits in that. Some of you people might be like, wow, that's way too much. It's like my treatment model might be slightly different than yours. I don't care what your number is. You just got to kind of find out what is reasonable for that number, and you've got to track that. Revenue per hour. So Arlen has started doing this. He's usually in front of the curve when it comes to metrics. I'm starting to come over to his side to kind of see what that looks like, but it's just a measure of efficiency. And when you show that to your clinicians, if you have an incentive-based plan for your clinicians, that can be very powerful. Revenue per full-time equivalent. We looked at this again, another measure of efficiency. We take all of our full-time equivalents, admin and clinical, and we look at how much revenue are we generating per full-time equivalent. You can do a similar one. I've seen revenue per square foot of space that you have. You find one that works for you and just kind of use it as a measure of efficiency. Cost per customer acquisition. If you guys are not doing this, this is something that you need to know. You need to know what you're willing to spend to get a new patient into your practice, because as you're evaluating other marketing avenues, other marketing companies, and you want to hold them accountable, which most people don't. Like if I run a newspaper ad or if I run Facebook ads, I'm like, hey, this is the number of plans of care that I expect to get for this amount of ad spend, because I know I want to spend $100 or less to get a new plan of care into my practice. So knowing what that number is for you is really important. If you guys really like this stuff and you want to know more about this, we're doing a live event that's coming up in Nashville. If you guys have not heard about this, I think that half of the seats are gone. We've only got 50 seats for this thing. So, and Lee is starting to invite other people that work with him. So seats are disappearing. I'm inviting someone that's working for me. So yeah, we only have.
Nashville
Go
is
ahead.
a sweet. It's Nashville is sweet, man. It's going to be a good
Yeah,
time
yeah,
to get
be a
down
good
there.
time.
So yeah,
Yep. So this is for growth-minded practices. If you're looking to stay stagnant and just kind of do the status quo, this kind of stuff is not for you, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that we throw at you in the presentations that we do. Really cool venue. We're going to be in Embassy Suites in downtown Nashville. We're going to have a really good time when we go out at night. But here are the things that we're going to be covering. Day one, we're going to go over marketing. Guys, we've never really covered marketing before at our live events, because we wanted to focus on other issues that are going on in your practice. But we're getting more and more requests for that. So guess what? This physician marketing, like this alone is, if you guys are not doing physician marketing, if you're doing physician marketing and not getting the results that you want, you're going to want to come to this session. Partner
yep,
workshops.
that's
Yep.
for you, Caleb, right there.
There you go,
Physician
Caleb.
marketing.
physician marketing partner workshops. I think I'm going to end up doing this because I think Lee is going to be out, but we're going to be doing, this is like kind of the zero ad spend that Lee kind of came up with. If you want to find ways to inexpensively bring in patients to your practice, we're going to talk a ton about that. Clinic expansion, that's obviously going to talk about marketing, but also like what kind of plan you need to put together if you're going to add new locations to what you're doing. Guys, I've added tons of locations to my practice. I've closed locations in my practice. All the founders have multiple locations. We're going to be able to help you out with this. If you've never opened up multiple locations or you want to open up multiple locations, we're going to be able to help you out with that. We have some really cool guest speakers. Eric Miller is going to come. If you guys have been on our webinars before, you've probably seen him. Active patient tracking. So we talked about this in the webinar. If you're not actively tracking your patients, you're going to struggle with some of these other metrics. You want to make sure that you have that nailed down. Revenue per visit spotlight. So this is going to be, we're going to go over some basics, but some higher level stuff. So kind of the same thing that I talked about today, where Chuck was talking to a client of ours, and he's kind of got the basics down, units per visit, kind of looking at how AMA rules work with your 8-minute rule versus how Medicare and CMS does theirs. That will be the basics, but now it's going to be code selection. And Chuck has really figured a couple cool things out with code selection that you're going to want to attend there if you want to try to make more money per visit. Patient indoctrination. So this, Arlen is awesome at this. So just getting that patient scheduled for an initial evaluation, the process has just started now. So again, for me, like that's the most important one that I want to go to, because it's like, if I'm going to go from 90% of my initial evaluation showing up to 95%, I've got to do something different between the time they schedule that initial evaluation and the time they actually come in for it in order to get them excited about coming into my practice. And then at the end of the first day, we have a roundtable, and then we do happy hour. Day 2 is going to be units and revenue per visit. Code selection, other revenue per visit tools. So again, we're going to go over that stuff again because it's so important. Accounts receivable management and the power of 5%. So if you are, there's a lot of people that are coming that are clients of ours. So they're going to get to understand the importance of that. I always thought, accounts receivable, my 60-day plus accounts receivable usually hung out around like 30 to 40%. I was like, well, I'll get paid eventually. And as it turns out, you really don't. You got to make sure you're managing that accounts receivable. We're going to teach you how to do that, whether you're a client of ours or whether you do your in-house or outsource your billing. If you outsource your billing, you're going to be able to hold whoever's doing that accountable, which is going to be really important. And then we have Empower EMR is going to come and talk. So we're really excited about them because they're doing some really cool stuff on the EMR side that I want to learn about. And then we're going to do some workshops. So using AI and virtual assistants. So we've seen a ton of power in using those two things in our practice to just become more efficient. As things get more expensive and as you grow, you're going to need help in terms of extra hands in all different places in your practice. Using virtual assistants and AI is going to be helpful there. And then selling a plan of care with Successful Rehab Plan. If we have extra time, I really want to try to look into OKRs and some strategic planning. But no matter what, if you come to Nashville, you're going to get a ton of value. If you like the stuff that we talked about today, you're going to like all the stuff that we do in Nashville. I know it is kind of tough to leave your practice and it's a big ask to come, but talk to anybody that's come to our live events and you'll hear nothing but amazing stuff. Lee, what's up?
I was going to ask you to drop the link into the chat.
Okay, yeah. So here, links in the chat. If you guys are seeing this on replay, then it will be somewhere in there. But here's the link for that. If oh, that's right, we're giving away. So everybody that came here, we have your information. We're going to give away a ticket to this. So if you are on here and you've already paid for a ticket and somehow you win the drawing, we'll give you a refund. But yeah, if you're watching this recording, sorry, you did not attend the webinar. So you're not going to be in line for that, but you can still come to the event. It's going to be an amazing event. The seats are selling out. We only have 50 seats in that room, Chuck has told me. So about half of them are gone. So if you guys want to try to improve your practice, then this event is a super cool way to do it. All right, Lee, what else? What else did I forget?
Like, how much is it?
How much is
It's
it? All right.
crazy.
Well,
Yes. I
go
mean, you're
down there.
getting like 300
There's two.
extra.
Yeah, there's two ticket options. So from here, are we in early bird still? I can't remember. So I think it's
I'm not sure.
297 for the 2-day ticket. If you want to do the mastermind event, so that's an extra day that we've added on there. That's super powerful. If you really love all this stuff and you want to try to implement it faster, then get a mastermind ticket. Go down to here and then put your information here. As you go to the next page, it'll tell you the cost for that. We only have, I think, 4 of those seats left. So if you are like watching this and you're like, hey man, I'm ready to make a change in my practice, then you want to do that event, that ticket. You come an extra day early, and the founders of NLPT and physicaltherapybuilding.com break down your practice and make huge changes and put together a 90-day plan for you to actually go back and implement all this stuff in your practice. If you're just kind of testing the waters, you want to come for the 2-day event, that's the green ticket here. So just put your information in here, continue payment. I don't have to put it in there. I don't know if we're still in early bird or not. Anyway, put your information in there, and you'll see all the payment information. If you guys have any questions about anything at all, if you're watching this on replay, then just reply to this email or wherever you're seeing this post. If you guys are here now, I'll put, let's see, chat. I mean, a lot of you already have it, but 619-371-8. This is my cell phone number. Shoot me a text. We can get on a call and see if this is something that is going to be right for you. Aaron says I'll be in Cancun for my 29th anniversary. Well, that's a good reason to miss the event. But if you're not in Cancun, you definitely need to come to this event. Go ahead, Lee. What are you going to say?
I think we should do it. Let's do a live tomorrow to announce the winner.
Okay.
In
all right.
base
Yeah,
camp.
we can do that.
Can we do
All
that?
right. There you go. So if you guys are in here now, Caleb Williams is here. I'm thinking maybe Caleb Williams isn't actually here, but I think I know who that is. So if you
Shouldn't
guys,
you be preparing for the draft?
he should be,
Not
but
worried about
hey,
post-season marketing.
he wants to see how he can improve his private practice. He's got to
There you go.
diversify his income. So, all right, guys, I'm going to get off now because I'm already over time. We're going to announce the winner of the free ticket tomorrow. So make sure you're paying attention to that. Hope you guys got some value out of this and you start actually doing the stuff that we said in this webinar. Start looking at these numbers. I know it's kind of like picking up a rock. You're kind of scared to find out what's underneath that, but the faster you find out what's underneath it, the faster you can attack it and bring this stuff back to your practice. And yeah, I'm excited to head down to Nashville again. If you have any questions, you want to get on a call and try to figure out if this event is for you, that's my cell phone number there, 610-955-3718. Shoot me a text and we can get on a call and talk. Lee, thanks for spending your evening with us. And
I want to say, hey, to Mike and Marianne, thanks for hopping on and all
Yeah.
and the rest, everyone. So it's good reconnecting with y'all. It's been a while.
Yeah. So hopefully you guys got some value out of this. And yeah, we'll wrap it up there. And as always, we'll see you guys at the top. Thanks, Lee.
Yep. Later, guys.